Hi, my name's Dr Alice Liddell, Clinical Psychologist for Health in Mind, which is part of Sussex Partnership NHS Foundation Trust. Today I'm going to be sharing with you 7 tips for managing anxiety and worry. So let's start with some definitions. What is anxiety? Anxiety is the body's natural response to threat. It's part of the fight or flight or freeze response. Some typical signs that we might be experiencing anxiety include feeling tense, on edge, our heart's racing, or shallow breathing. Anxiety is like an alarm that alerts us to danger so that we can do something about it. It's very natural and very normal, especially in the current climate. What is worry? So we often think of worry as an emotion, a lot like anxiety, but it can be more helpful to think of worry as a thought process focused on the future. These thoughts typically tend to start with what if, and that can set off a chain reaction that leads to worst case scenarios. It tends to be a lot more common when we're faced with more uncertainty than we ordinarily feel comfortable with, as is the current situation for most people right now. So this is a very common experience and again, very natural and very understandable. However, it can set off something of a vicious cycle. So the more anxious that we feel, the more likely it is that we worry. And the more that we worry, the more anxious that we feel. So let's go through an example to think about this together. In this example, someone needs to get some milk. And the first thought that they have is, what if I get COVID-19? Which sets off another thought, what if I give it to my partner? And another thought, what if he gives it to his colleagues? What if they give it to their families and everyone they know? What if everyone they know and we know gets sick, or worse, dies? And so you can see how with each of these thoughts, the scenarios get increasingly more threatening. And that, of course, increases our sense of anxiety that's going to be triggered by these thoughts. Now, I'm going to take you through 7 tips for how to break this cycle. But it's important to say that the starting point for any of those tips is to first notice that we're in that cycle or that we're experiencing anxiety. And it usually helps if we can do that by tuning into our bodies. So noticing and paying attention to those signs that I mentioned earlier, like our hearts racing. So the 7 tips for managing anxiety and worry that I'm going to be sharing with you today are: 1, being kind to yourself. 2, taking practical steps. 3, letting go. 4, staying present. 5, postponing worry. 6, limiting triggers. And 7, relaxation exercises. So let's start off with being kind to yourself. It's important to acknowledge that your thoughts and feelings are very natural and very normal. You're allowed to feel the way that you do. Often when we're experiencing thoughts and feelings that feel unpleasant, uncomfortable in some way, we want to push them away or push against them. Unfortunately, this can often make them last a lot longer. So it's important to give yourself space to simply feel how you're feeling. If you find this difficult, you might want to create yourself a set phrase to say to yourself, and that kind of becomes your go-to response rather than pushing it away. So it could be something like, it's okay to feel this way. And try to say this to yourself in the way that you would to your best friend or a loved one, with that kind tone of voice. If you think you might have difficulty remembering to do this, you could always write it down and put it somewhere visible. 2, taking practical steps. So I want to acknowledge that there are many things that are outside of our control, and that's really much more noticeable in the current climate. However, it can be important and empowering to focus on what is in our control. So we could start by noting down all the worries and the different worry thoughts that are going through our minds. And then looking through that list, see if you can identify anything that could be considered a current practical problem. And you'll know if it is a current practical problem by asking yourself, is there something I can do about this? And if there is, then that's great. Start taking some practical steps to address that. If you can't do something about it straight away, then create yourself an action plan, schedule it into your diary, and set yourself a reminder. 3, letting go. So for all of the worries that you've written down, the ones that aren't practical things you can do something about, there'll be things that are outside of your control. And it's important that we try to accept that this is the case and let go. Now, the thing about thoughts is the more attention we give them, the more power they have. So if we're focusing all the things outside of our control, we are going to feel more anxious. And rather than pushing away or pushing against them, it can be more helpful to move our attention. So refocusing on something by gently guiding that spotlight of attention onto whatever it is that we are doing in the present moment. And that brings us on nicely to 4, staying present. Now this can be quite tricky. So if at the moment you're in a place where your mind is not ready to try and stay with what you're experiencing, that's completely okay. And you might find the next tip, postponing worry, to be a bit more useful for you right now. But if you are in a place where you want to give this a go, I would really encourage it. And the key to this is to get out of our heads and to focus on our bodies. Ways that we can do this might include feeling the floor with our feet, moving, for example, through walking or dancing, or any activity of your choice, and also mindfulness meditation. And I've included some links below to help you find out more about that. I just wanted to share a very quick grounding exercise that you can do that helps with staying present and reducing anxiety. And this is about noticing what's in your environment through the 5 senses. So 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. 5, postponing worry. So as I said before, this can be a good one if the idea of letting go of worries feels too much right now. And instead you can say, oh, I'll worry about it later, so putting it off. The starting point with this is to create a set time and duration that is your worry time. For example, 8 p.m. for 30 minutes. But choose a time that feels right for you. And then for the rest of the day, whenever worries come up, you're going to redirect your attention, but rather than completely letting them go, you'll tell yourself, I'll worry about that at worry time. When it comes to worry time, write down all of your worries and have a look through. See if you can find if there are any current practical problems in there that you could do something about. And if there are, that's great. You know what to do with those now. That's in step 2. You might also want to reflect on if there's been any difference in your experience of anxiety and worry that day by the simple act of putting things off until later. And it might sound a little bit odd, but do try to worry for all of worry time. So if you set aside that 30 minutes and after 15 minutes you think, oh, I'm kind of done now, still keep going with it, because that's how much time you felt that you really needed, and you don't want to shortchange yourself. And again, you might be able to notice, oh, what's that like? What has changed in your experience of worry from the simple act of putting it off? And if you don't need that time, then the next day you could reduce the amount of time. 6. Limiting triggers. So, as I said before, there are many things that are outside of our control, but we can control our behaviour. At the moment, it's important to stay up to date with what's going on in the news, and it's very understandable and natural that our minds are going to want to do this because it's a way of protecting us from the threat by trying to be prepared. However, if we're spending too much time looking at these images and reading up on the news, it can often keep that sense of threat going and increase our sense of anxiety. So try to limit how much information you're taking in and only use reputable sources. 7. Relaxation exercises. So these help us to switch out of the fight or flight or freeze mode and into more of a rest and digest mode by changing what's happening in our bodies. They tend to work best if practiced daily, and that helps us to both know what we're doing better when we need it and also to feel more benefit. So you can use them as a daily practice as well as in more heightened states of anxiety. Some examples include abdominal breathing, which is sometimes also called belly or diaphragmatic breathing, box breathing, and progressive muscle relaxation. And again, I'll include some links below for more information about those techniques. Okay, so those are the 7 tips for managing anxiety and worry. But before I go, I just wanted to say a few things about how you might take these forward. It's important to know that techniques take time and practice to feel the benefit. So if you feel like you're not really noticing any changes straight away, do keep going. It will be worth it. It can also really help to stay connected with your friends and family, to talk through your worries with them, get some reassurance and also another perspective. And if you're really struggling and you need someone to talk to that's maybe not your friends or family, and you're maybe thinking that you need a bit more professional support, then do contact local services or helplines. They'll be really willing to help. Okay, so those are the 7 tips for managing anxiety and worry. I will leave those up there for you as a summary. I hope that's given you some useful ideas for things that you can try at home. Thank you so much for watching and take care.